Hey everyone! Welcome back to the channel. I hope you're having a wonderful day. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give a like if you enjoy the video, and leave a comment below. I love hearing your thoughts. Today's story is full of heartache, betrayal, and a long journey towards healing. If you've ever wondered what happens when a seemingly perfect relationship begins to crumble, this story is for you. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into it. Tom and Grace had been married for over 20 years. They lived in a quaint, suburban house on the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia, where life was easy and comfortable. Their marriage was built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and love. They had 2 children, Ben, a 16-year-old high school student, and Emma, a 14-year-old middle schooler. Both children were excelling in school, and the Thompsons had everything they could have asked for. Tom worked as a civil engineer, while Grace was a high school teacher. They met in college, fell in love quickly, and married shortly after graduation. Since then, their lives had been intertwined, loving, nurturing, and built on routine. Family vacations, Sunday dinners, and annual summer getaways to the lake had all formed the backdrop to their life together. Everything seemed perfect on the outside. But recently, Tom had begun to notice something subtle yet troubling about Grace. She had become distant, almost like a stranger in their home. The affectionate gestures, the quiet mornings they spent together, the little shared moments of intimacy had all but vanished. It wasn't just physical, the emotional bond they once shared was slowly slipping away. At first, Tom chalked it up to the stress of life, teaching, raising kids, running a household. He thought it was a phase that would pass, but the distance between them only seemed to grow. The shift in their relationship became more apparent as Grace began spending more time at work, staying late after school and attending extra meetings. Tom noticed she wasn't quite as involved with the family anymore. The quiet evenings they once shared on the couch watching movies had become rarer. Grace had become increasingly preoccupied, often on her phone, texting, or engaging in other distractions, always avoiding the deep conversations they once shared. It wasn't just the time away from the family that bothered Tom, it was the absence of affection. He would try to reach out to Grace to talk about their day, but more often than not, she would shrug it off or give short, dismissive answers. Tom had started feeling like a roommate, not a husband. The little signs, being brushed off, the unreturned kisses, the cold nights in bed, were too frequent to ignore. One evening, after another lackluster dinner, Tom decided to bring up the issue. He couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. Grace had become more withdrawn, and Tom knew deep down that something had changed. "Grace," Tom began, breaking the silence, "we need to talk." Grace glanced at him, her eyes tired. "About what, Tom?" Tom hesitated. He didn't want to accuse her of anything without knowing the truth, but the concern gnawed at him. "About us. I feel like we're drifting apart. I don't know when it started, but it's been building for a while. We're not the same, Grace. I don't know if it's work or the kids or what, but I feel like you're pulling away from me." Grace sighed, setting her glass of wine down. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the floor, her fingers tapping the edge of the table. "I don't know what to say, Tom. I'm just tired, you know? I've got so much on my plate. And it's not just with the family, there are things at work, personal things I've been dealing with." Tom felt the weight of her words, but it wasn't enough to ease his growing concerns. "I get it. You're tired, but we've always talked about things before. Why are you so distant now? Why do I feel like I'm losing you?" Grace looked up at him, a mix of sadness and frustration in her eyes. "I don't know how to explain it, Tom. I don't want to hurt you, but I just need some space. I've been feeling so overwhelmed, and I'm not sure what I'm doing anymore." The words hit Tom hard. He had never imagined that he'd be having a conversation like this with Grace. They had built their life together on a foundation of trust, mutual understanding, and love. To hear her speak like this, to feel the distance between them growing larger with every word, was more painful than he could have imagined. "I don't want to lose you, Grace," he said quietly, his voice cracking. "But I can't keep living like this, unsure of where we stand. We need to figure this out. We need to talk." Grace nodded, but there was a sense of finality in the air. She didn't respond right away, and the silence between them felt like a chasm that neither of them knew how to cross. Later that night, after the conversation had ended, Tom lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. He replayed their conversation over and over in his mind, trying to make sense of it all. What did it mean? Was she just tired? Or was there something more going on? He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. His instincts were telling him that Grace wasn't being completely honest with him. The thought of it made his stomach turn, and he couldn't help but wonder. Had she been hiding something from him all along? Part 2, The Breaking Point. The following week was a blur of tension and unanswered questions. Tom tried his best to go about his daily life, work, family responsibilities, and the usual routine, but his mind constantly returned to the conversation he and Grace had shared. There was a heavy weight pressing down on his chest, and he couldn't escape it. He had hoped that things would return to normal. After all, Grace had reassured him that everything was fine, that she just needed some space. But Tom couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, something she wasn't telling him. The uncertainty was unbearable. The following Friday, Grace was out late again, claiming she had a school event to attend. Tom had learned to stop questioning her excuses, but that didn't stop his mind from racing. When Grace came home after 10 p.m., she seemed unusually quiet, almost on edge. "Hey, how was the event?" Tom asked casually, but the tension in his voice was hard to ignore. "It was fine," Grace replied quickly, removing her coat and tossing it onto the couch. "Just a few last-minute things, you know how it is." Tom nodded, but something felt off. Her response was too quick, too dismissive. He could tell she was avoiding eye contact, and that small detail alone made him uneasy. Later that evening, as Grace disappeared into the bedroom to change, Tom found himself standing at the kitchen counter, lost in thought. His instincts were telling him that something wasn't right. He needed answers. But how could he get them? How could he confront Grace without making things worse? He walked over to the living room couch and reached for his phone. He had been avoiding checking Grace's messages for weeks now, but tonight he couldn't help himself. He opened up her messaging app, hesitating for just a second before scrolling through the conversations. His heart raced as he quickly scanned her messages. And there it was, the name that had been haunting him for weeks. Mark. The conversation was casual at first, but as Tom scrolled further, his breath caught in his throat. The messages between Grace and Mark were flirtatious, sometimes suggestive, and clearly intimate. There was no doubt about it. Grace and Mark had been seeing each other. The evidence was staring him right in the face. For a moment, everything around Tom seemed to disappear. The world felt like it was spinning, and his heart sank into his stomach. The woman he had trusted with everything had betrayed him in the worst possible way. Part 3. The Confrontation. Tom's mind raced as he closed the phone, his hands trembling. He felt the weight of his discovery crashing down on him. What was he supposed to do now? He couldn't let this go, but confronting Grace about the affair felt like the hardest thing he had ever done. He paced back and forth in the living room, trying to calm his racing thoughts. The anger was starting to bubble up, but so was the hurt. He had never imagined that Grace could do something like this. She had been his best friend, his confidant. How could she have betrayed him like this? Finally, he knew what he had to do. He couldn't let this linger any longer. He needed the truth, no matter how painful it was going to be. When Grace came out of the bedroom, freshly changed into her pajamas, she froze as soon as she saw Tom standing in the living room, his face pale and his expression hard. "What's wrong, Tom?" she asked, her voice filled with nervous uncertainty. "Don't lie to me, Grace," Tom said, his voice sharp. "I know about you and Mark. I've seen the messages. You've been seeing him behind my back." Grace's face went white, and she took a step back, as if the truth had physically struck her. For a moment, she said nothing, unable to form the words. Then, with a shaky breath, she finally spoke. "Tom, I didn't mean for this to happen. It was just one thing after another. I was feeling so alone. You were always so busy, and I started talking to him. It wasn't supposed to go this far, I swear." Tom's fists clenched at his sides, but he didn't shout. He didn't need to. The truth was more painful than any anger he could express. "How long has this been going on, Grace?" Tom asked, his voice trembling. His eyes locked with hers, and he could see the tears welling up in her eyes. "Months," she admitted quietly. "It started a long time ago, but it never should have happened, Tom. I'm sorry. I know I've destroyed everything." Tom shook his head slowly. The pain was overwhelming. He had trusted her completely, and she had betrayed him in the most intimate way possible. The silence between them felt suffocating. "Why, Grace?" Tom finally asked, his voice breaking. "Why did you do this to us? To me? To our family?" "I don't have an answer for that, Tom. I don't," Grace whispered. "I was confused. And I made a terrible mistake. I never meant to hurt you. I love you, Tom. Please believe me." Tom looked at her for a long moment, the hurt in his eyes clearer than words could express. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Grace. I need some time to think." Part 4, The Fallout. The following days were the hardest of Tom's life. He couldn't get the image of Grace's betrayal out of his mind. He spent his days in a daze, trying to function while his world felt like it had shattered around him. He went through the motions of work and taking care of the kids, but he wasn't really there. His mind was consumed with thoughts of Grace's affair and how everything they had built together seemed to be crumbling. At night, he would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how it had all gone wrong. Had their marriage been a lie? Had he missed the signs, the little hints that something was off? Could he ever trust Grace again? And then there was the question that haunted him the most. What about the kids? How would this affect Ben and Emma? The thought of their family being torn apart broke Tom's heart. But at the same time, he couldn't ignore the reality of what Grace had done. He couldn't just pretend like everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. Part 4, The Fallout. The days following the confrontation were the hardest of Tom's life. Every morning, he woke up feeling like he was carrying a weight that was too heavy to bear. The emotional toll of Grace's betrayal took its toll on him, and even though he tried to stay functional for the sake of his children, the house felt colder than ever. Grace, on the other hand, was completely broken. She had made the biggest mistake of her life, and now she was desperate to find a way to undo it. But Tom was a man who had always believed in trust and loyalty, and to him the damage seemed irreparable. Tom's mind was constantly in turmoil. He spent hours lying awake at night, turning over every aspect of their marriage, wondering where it had all gone wrong. He had always been a devoted husband, a man who put his family above all else. But now his world was filled with doubt. The trust they had built over the years had been shattered, and he couldn't help but wonder if there was a way back. Step 1, the kids and the family. One of the hardest things for Tom was having to maintain a sense of normalcy for Ben and Emma. They were oblivious to the turmoil their parents were going through, and Tom didn't know how much to tell them. He couldn't bear the thought of their family breaking apart. They were good kids, smart, kind, and full of potential. They deserved better than this mess. Tom had been careful not to show his kids the strain in his marriage. He didn't want them to feel like they were caught in the middle of something that they shouldn't have to deal with. Every evening, he put on a brave face and carried on like everything was normal. But inside, he was dying. He found himself snapping at them for no reason, frustrated by the situation. His emotions were all over the place, and he didn't know how to process them. He was angry at Grace, yes, but he was also angry at himself for not seeing the signs sooner. How had he missed it? Emma, who had always been a sensitive and perceptive child, started to notice the tension between her parents. She had always been close to her mother, and now she couldn't help but sense that something was off. One evening, while Tom was helping Ben with his homework, Emma came to him, her eyes filled with concern. "Dad," she said softly, "are you and Mom okay? You've been acting weird lately, and she's been different too." Tom felt his heart sink. He knew this moment was coming. He couldn't lie to Emma. He couldn't pretend everything was fine. But he also didn't want to burden her with the weight of the situation. "We're okay, sweetheart," he said, trying his best to sound convincing. "Just some stuff we're working through, but everything will be fine. I promise." Emma didn't look convinced. She hesitated for a moment, then gave her father a hug. "I just want you both to be happy," she whispered before walking off. Tom stood there for a long time, the weight of his daughter's concern weighing heavily on him. How was he supposed to make things right? How could he fix everything when everything seemed so broken? Step 2. Seeking help. A few days later, Tom found himself sitting across from a therapist. He had decided to take the advice of his friends and family and seek help. It wasn't easy for him to admit, but he needed guidance. He couldn't fix this alone. The therapist was a woman in her late 40s, calm and composed with an understanding demeanor. Tom had never been someone to open up easily, but he was willing to try. He couldn't continue living in this emotional prison. He needed to understand how to navigate through the pain, how to move forward, whether with Grace or without her. So, tell me, Tom, the therapist began, what's the root of your pain right now? Tom paused for a moment, trying to find the words. He had been thinking about this for days, but now that he was here, speaking it aloud felt like a whole new challenge. I feel betrayed, he said, his voice breaking. I trusted Grace with everything. We've built a life together. And now it feels like I don't know who she is anymore. It's not just that she cheated. It's that she hid it from me for so long. She was lying to me for months. I don't know if I can ever get past that. The therapist nodded, her expression empathetic. It's understandable that you're feeling that way. Infidelity can destroy trust, and trust is the foundation of any relationship. But what I want you to understand is that healing takes time. It won't happen overnight, and you can't rush it. You need to focus on what's best for you right now, what you need to heal, to regain control over your own emotions. That's the first step. Tom looked at her, a little surprised. You think there's hope for us? For Grace and me? The therapist leaned forward, her voice gentle. There is always hope for healing, but it depends on both of you. Grace has to be willing to change as much as you have to be willing to forgive. You can't control her actions, but you can control how you respond to them. It's not easy, but it's possible. Step 3. Grace's apology. The following week, after Tom had taken the first step in addressing his emotions, Grace approached him again. She seemed different now, more broken and honest than he had ever seen her. Her guilt was palpable, and Tom could see the pain in her eyes. I've been thinking a lot about everything, Tom, she said quietly, sitting across from him in their living room. I never meant to hurt you. I made the worst mistake of my life, and I don't know how to fix it. I've been selfish and I've lied to you. But I love you. I always have. Tom didn't know what to say. The words she spoke felt like both a comfort and a further wound. She loved him, but how could that love erase the damage? I don't know if I can forgive you, Grace, he finally admitted. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. But I'm willing to try. For us. For the kids. But it's going to take time. Grace nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll do whatever it takes, Tom. I'll prove to you that I can be the woman you deserve. Please don't give up on us. Tom stared at her, his heart torn in two. Could he really move forward with her after everything that had happened? Could they rebuild what had been broken? Part 5. Rebuilding Trust. The weeks after Grace's heartfelt apology were the hardest for both of them. Grace was truly trying to make things right, but Tom couldn't shake the feeling that he was constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. The hurt was still fresh, and every time he looked at Grace, he was reminded of the betrayal. For the first time, Tom realized how fragile their relationship had been. He had always thought that their bond was unbreakable. They had weathered the challenges of life together, raising children, building careers, and even enduring the inevitable stresses that come with marriage. But now it felt as though everything was in question. Was it too late to fix things? Grace, for her part, was committed to rebuilding their marriage. She made it clear that she was going to be transparent with him in every way possible. She stopped hiding her phone, she shared everything about her day, and she made sure that every move she made was above reproach. Still, no matter how hard she tried, there was a wall between them. Tom couldn't fully trust her again, and every day that passed, it seemed harder to let go of the anger that had built up over months of deceit. Step 1. The distance between them. One evening, after dinner, Tom and Grace sat in the living room in uncomfortable silence. It wasn't that they didn't love each other anymore, it was that the emotional intimacy they once shared felt lost. They were both trying to reconnect, but it was like they were speaking different languages. Grace tried to bridge the gap by talking about their future plans, something they had once done with ease. Tom, maybe we could think about taking a trip to the beach this summer. I know we've been so focused on everything that's happened, but maybe we need to just relax. You know? Spend time together like we used to. Tom hesitated before responding, his voice careful. I don't know, Grace. It feels like we're living in a dream right now. Everything feels so uncertain. Grace looked down, her face falling. She knew she couldn't erase what she had done, but the idea of starting fresh, of doing something normal, felt like a distant dream. Maybe we can start small, she suggested. Just a weekend away. You, me, the kids. Nothing fancy. Just a chance to breathe. Tom looked at her, the weariness in his eyes evident. I don't know if I'm ready for that yet. I'm still trying to process everything. I need more time, Grace. And that was the truth. Tom wasn't ready to let go of the hurt. He wasn't ready to pretend like things were normal when they were anything but. The effort it took to stay present in the relationship, to act like they were just going through a rough patch, was overwhelming. Step 2. Conversations with Liam. Tom's old friend, Liam, had been a rock for him throughout this tumultuous period. Liam had been through his own painful divorce years ago, and his experience made him a valuable confidant. He didn't offer solutions, but rather a sounding board for Tom's many fears, frustrations, and doubts. One evening, Tom met Liam for a drink at a local bar. He was desperate for an escape, for someone who could provide him with a perspective that wasn't clouded by the mess of his own emotions. "I just don't know what to do anymore," Tom confessed, staring down at his beer. "I want to move forward, I do. But every time I look at Grace, I see her with him. I see her betraying me." Liam nodded slowly. "I get it, man. The pain you're feeling is valid. You're not crazy for feeling this way. But you've got to ask yourself, is this something you want to fight for? Because if you don't truly want to fight for Grace and the family you've built, then maybe it's time to walk away." Tom shook his head. "I don't know if I can forgive her, Liam. I keep saying I will, but every time we try to move forward, the anger takes over." "Forgiveness isn't easy," Liam said quietly. "It's a process. It's not about forgetting, it's about choosing to move forward despite the hurt. You've got to make that choice, Tom. No one can do it for you." Tom didn't know what he expected to hear from Liam, but those words made him pause. He had been stuck in the past, stuck in the pain. He hadn't considered that forgiveness wasn't something that would come naturally, it was something he would have to choose every day if he wanted his marriage to survive. Step 3. A path toward healing. After his conversation with Liam, Tom realized he needed to take responsibility for his own healing. Grace had done her part and she was continuing to try. But Tom had been holding on to the pain, letting it fester instead of letting it go. The next day, Tom sat down with Grace and made a decision. They needed to go to therapy. Together. They couldn't keep trying to fix things on their own. It was too hard. The silence between them had become suffocating, and they both needed help navigating the murky waters of their relationship. Grace agreed, and they set up their first appointment with a therapist who specialized in couples. It was a step forward, a glimmer of hope in a sea of uncertainty. Step 4. Therapy and reflection. The first therapy session was awkward. Neither of them knew what to expect, but they both understood that this was their chance to finally address the deep-seated issues that had caused the rift in their relationship. The therapist, a gentle woman named Linda, guided them through the session, asking them to reflect on the root of their problems. Tom found himself opening up more than he had in months. He admitted how hurt he had been, how difficult it was to trust again. Grace, too, shared her regrets and guilt. For the first time in a long time, they were honest with each other. It felt like a weight was lifting, though neither of them were naive enough to think that the road ahead would be easy. But this was the first step toward healing. And for the first time in months, Tom felt like there was a chance. There was a chance to rebuild, to rediscover the love they had once shared. Part 6. The Road to Rebuilding. After the first therapy session, things didn't magically improve for Tom and Grace, but it felt like a shift had begun. Tom couldn't deny that talking to a professional had brought some clarity. He wasn't alone in this anymore, he had Grace by his side, and they had a chance, however small, to repair their relationship. But he knew that healing would take time, and it would not be easy. Each therapy session felt like an emotional battle. Tom wasn't used to opening up about his feelings, and Grace was no different. It was awkward, uncomfortable, and often painful. But at the same time, there were moments of breakthrough. During their second session, Grace revealed something that had been weighing heavily on her. "I never felt truly heard by you, Tom," Grace admitted, her voice trembling as she looked down at her hands. "I was always trying to keep up with everything, work, family, our life, but I was overwhelmed and you didn't see it. I felt invisible, and I guess that's when I started looking for validation from Mark." Tom's heart ached at her words. He had always thought he was doing everything he could for their family. He worked hard to provide for them, to create a stable life. But he had been so focused on his own responsibilities that he had missed Grace's silent struggle. "I'm sorry, Grace," Tom said softly. "I didn't see it. I didn't know how overwhelmed you were. I thought I was doing enough, but I wasn't there for you. I should have been." Grace looked at him, her eyes full of sadness. "I didn't know how to ask for help. I thought you would see it on your own, but I didn't communicate. And that's my fault, too." The conversation was difficult, but it was a turning point. They were finally acknowledging their issues openly without blame or shame. Tom realized that he had failed to recognize Grace's emotional needs, just as Grace admitted to not being honest about her feelings. Step 1. Taking responsibility. The next few days were filled with reflection for both of them. Grace was trying to make amends, and Tom was trying to understand how to forgive. He knew that forgiveness wasn't something that would happen instantly. It was a process. And while he was willing to try, he couldn't rush it. Tom began paying more attention to the little things that had once been the glue that held their relationship together. He started small, making an effort to really listen when Grace talked, showing interest in her day and asking about her feelings. He had to learn to be more present, to show her that he was there, truly there, emotionally and physically. Grace, for her part, took responsibility for her actions. She made sure to be transparent with Tom, sharing everything openly. She let go of the barriers she had built around herself, even the ones she hadn't realized existed. She took the initiative to plan date nights, even simple outings to the park, just to reconnect with Tom. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The kids, Ben and Emma, noticed the change, too. It wasn't that everything was perfect, but the tension that had once filled the house had started to fade. Grace and Tom had begun to communicate again, and though their relationship wasn't fully restored, it was no longer a battlefield. Step 2. A glimmer of hope. 2 months after the first therapy session, Grace and Tom had their first real date night in what felt like years. They left the kids with a neighbor and went to a small Italian restaurant that they had frequented when they first started dating. The night was filled with conversation, laughter, and the kind of connection they had missed for so long. Over dinner, Grace reached for Tom's hand, her eyes meeting his. "I know I've messed up, Tom, but I'm really trying to change. I want to be the woman you deserve. I know it's going to take time, but I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Tom squeezed her hand, his heart swelling with a mix of hope and uncertainty. "I'm trying too, Grace. I'm trying to forgive. I know it won't happen overnight, but I believe we can get through this. I still love you and I'm willing to fight for us." That night, they both realized something important. They weren't done. They weren't ready to throw in the towel, no matter how difficult things had gotten. They both had work to do, both individually and as a couple, but they were willing to fight for each other. Step 3. Rebuilding slowly but surely. Over the next few months, Grace and Tom continued their therapy sessions and worked hard to restore their bond. It wasn't easy. There were moments when they both wanted to give up, when the weight of their past mistakes felt too heavy to bear. But they kept going, one step at a time, finding small victories along the way. Tom started to see Grace in a new light. He saw her vulnerability, her struggle, and her desire to be better, not just for him, but for herself. Grace, in turn, began to trust Tom again. She knew that he would be there for her, that he wasn't going to walk away. They weren't perfect, and they still had a long way to go. But there was a sense of hope in their relationship that hadn't been there before. They had come through the storm, and while the scars remained, they were learning how to heal together. Part 7. The Test of Time. Tom had started to feel like the worst was behind them. The last few months had been tough, and they were still in the process of rebuilding, but things had started to settle into a new rhythm. They were talking more, connecting on a deeper level, and starting to experience those small moments of intimacy that had been absent for so long. But just as Tom began to feel like they might make it, life threw another obstacle their way. Started on a Saturday afternoon, just like any other weekend. Tom had been working on the house, fixing up a few things that had been on the to-do list for ages. Grace had been at a teacher's meeting for most of the morning, and Tom had decided to take advantage of the quiet time to catch up on some much-needed work. When Grace came home, she was a little different. She seemed distracted, quiet. Tom noticed immediately but didn't want to press her, so he let it go at first. "Hey, how was the meeting?" Tom asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "It was fine," Grace replied, her tone flat. Tom raised an eyebrow but decided not to push. "Are you okay?" he asked, walking towards her. Grace nodded quickly, but Tom could see the look in her eyes. Something wasn't right. He wasn't sure what had changed, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Later that evening, while they were having dinner with the kids, Grace's phone buzzed on the table. Tom noticed it was from Mark, the same man she had had the affair with. His stomach turned, and a cold chill ran down his spine. Grace didn't pick up the phone, but she looked at it for just a second before picking it up quickly and excusing herself from the table. It was the way she acted, nervous, fidgety, that sent alarm bells ringing in Tom's mind. Step 1. The suspicion returns. That night, Tom couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the events of the evening in his head. The phone buzz, Grace's sudden exit from the table. Everything felt eerily familiar. Had the affair truly ended? Or was Grace keeping something from him again? He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Every time he closed his eyes, all he could think about was the connection between Grace and Mark. He had fought so hard to rebuild trust, but now it felt like it was slipping away again. The next morning, after the kids left for school, Tom decided he needed to get to the bottom of this. He couldn't go on living in a state of uncertainty. He waited until Grace was in the kitchen, making breakfast, and then decided to confront her. "Grace," he said softly, trying to keep his voice steady, "I need to talk to you about something." She turned around, her face instantly dropping when she saw the serious expression on his face. "What is it, Tom?" He hesitated for a moment, looking for the right words. "I noticed you got a message from Mark last night. You looked uncomfortable. I'm not accusing you of anything, but I just want to know the truth. Is there something still going on between you two?" Grace's face went pale, and for a moment, Tom thought she might cry. She took a deep breath before responding, her voice quiet but clear. "I swear, Tom, I haven't seen him in months. That's the truth. We haven't been in contact in any way, and I've been doing everything I can to rebuild our relationship. I love you. I'm committed to you, to our family. But there are times, Tom, when the past comes back, and it messes with my head. I promise you there's nothing going on. It was a mistake to have the affair, and I've regretted it every day." Tom's heart was heavy with doubt. Part of him wanted to believe her, he really did. But another part of him couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. The emotional distance, the hesitations in her voice, the lingering connection with Mark. He just couldn't ignore it. "I don't know, Grace," Tom said, his voice breaking. "It's hard for me to just forget everything that's happened. How can I trust you again when I keep finding things that don't add up?" Step 2, the wall of doubt. Grace looked at him, her eyes filled with genuine remorse. But Tom was no longer sure of her sincerity. He had given her so much. He had tried to move on from her betrayal, and he had worked hard to forgive her. But every time a new doubt surfaced, it brought him back to square one. "I know you're struggling with this, Tom," Grace said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I am trying. I love you. I'm trying to prove that every day." Tom swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. "I want to believe you. I really do. But I can't help but wonder. What if I'm just fooling myself? What if I'm still the one holding on to the past, and I'm not seeing things clearly?" Grace reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "I don't want to lose you, Tom. I don't want to go back to the way things were. Please, I'm begging you." For a moment, Tom looked at her, searching her face for any hint of deceit. He saw none, but the doubt was still there, swirling in the back of his mind. Step 3, the breaking point. That evening, Tom made a decision. He couldn't continue living like this, caught in a constant state of suspicion and uncertainty. He needed to make a choice. Either he would trust Grace fully, or he would have to let her go. But could he trust her again? Grace had been open, and she had apologized countless times. She had promised that the affair was over and that she was committed to rebuilding their relationship. But Tom couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something she wasn't telling him. "I can't keep living like this, Grace," Tom finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm trying, I really am. But I don't know if I can keep going like this." Grace's eyes widened in shock. "What are you saying, Tom?" "I'm saying that I need to know if I can trust you. I need you to prove it to me. If you can't, then maybe we need to take a step back." Part 7, the unspoken truth. Tom sat silently at the kitchen table, the weight of the conversation hanging heavily in the air. His mind was racing and his heart was torn. He had asked Grace to prove her loyalty, to show him that she was worth trusting again, but was it even possible? Could he ever truly forgive her for what she had done? Grace had retreated into herself after Tom's words. She had looked as though the air had been knocked out of her. But Tom knew the damage had been done. He had laid the foundation for the difficult conversation they both needed to have. Would they stay together, or was it time to let go? The uncertainty had settled in, and neither of them knew where to go from here. For the first time in a long time, Grace seemed distant. There were no more promises, no more hopeful reassurances. It was as if she had accepted the reality of the situation. But that in itself made Tom uneasy. Was she finally letting go of the marriage, or was she just resigned to the fact that she could never fully redeem herself? Step 1, the phone call. The following afternoon, Grace was out running errands. Tom had taken the day off work to spend time thinking about the future of his family, his marriage, and what it all meant now. But just as he was reflecting on everything, his phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. It caught him off guard, and for a moment he hesitated before opening it. When he did, his stomach sank. It was a simple message: "I miss you. When can we meet again?" It was from Mark. Tom's heart began to race as the reality of the situation hit him like a ton of bricks. He had asked Grace to prove herself, but it seemed she was still hiding something that could undo all the progress they had made. His mind spiraled as he looked at the message again, replaying the worst-case scenario in his mind. Had she not ended things with Mark? Had she been lying to him this whole time? Before he could even process his emotions, his phone rang. It was Grace. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself before answering. "Hi, Grace," he said, his voice flat, but inside his thoughts were racing. "Hey, Tom," she replied, her voice calm, almost too calm. "I just wanted to check in. I'll be home soon." Tom didn't know what to say. The message from Mark still lingered in his mind, and he couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal all over again. But he didn't want to jump to conclusions. He needed answers, and he couldn't go on like this in the dark. Step 2: Confrontation. When Grace arrived home, Tom was already waiting. The message he had found earlier was still sitting in his mind like an open wound, and the tension was unbearable. "Grace," Tom said, his voice calm but firm, "we need to talk." Grace immediately tensed. She knew this wasn't a conversation they could avoid anymore. She had seen the look in Tom's eyes, and it was the same look he had given her when he had found out about the affair. The anger, the hurt, it was all back again. "I know, Tom," Grace said softly, sitting down in front of him. "I know you're angry. And I can't blame you for that. I've hurt you, and I can't change the past." Tom took a deep breath and showed her the message. "What's this, Grace? Why is Mark still contacting you? I thought you said it was over." Grace's face turned pale, and she froze. She looked down at her hands, trying to find the words. "Tom, I didn't want you to find out this way. I thought I could make it right on my own, but I can't. Yes, Mark and I have been in contact. But I promise you, it's not what you think. I ended things with him. I swear I did." Tom's heart pounded. He wanted to believe her. He truly did. But the pain of what he had already discovered made it so hard to trust her. He had given her a chance to prove herself, and now it seemed like the wounds were reopening. "Grace, I need the truth. No more lies. How long have you been in contact with him? Are you still seeing him?" Tom's voice cracked as the anger and hurt flooded his chest. Grace shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I swear, Tom, I haven't seen him. I've only been texting him, trying to get closure. But I understand if you don't believe me. I don't deserve your trust anymore. I don't deserve you." Tom stood up, pacing the room as he processed the information. Grace had already crossed the line, but now she was admitting that she hadn't completely cut ties with Mark. The doubt that had been growing inside of him for weeks now felt confirmed. "I don't know if I can do this, Grace. I don't know if I can keep going like this with all these lies hanging between us. I asked you to prove yourself, but it feels like you're still hiding things." Grace reached for his hand, but Tom pulled back. "I need space, Grace. I need to figure this out. I don't know what the next step is, but I can't keep pretending that everything is okay." Step 3: The hardest decision. The silence between them was deafening. Tom felt the weight of the decision ahead of him. He could see the tears in Grace's eyes, but he couldn't ignore the doubts in his mind. Could he forgive her again? Could he trust her after everything? "I don't know if I can keep going like this, Grace. I need time to think about everything. I need to figure out what I want." Grace nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand. I've hurt you in ways I can't even begin to explain. I'm sorry. But I want you to know I'm committed to making this work if you'll let me." Tom didn't respond. He simply turned away, feeling the weight of his decision settle on his shoulders. Part 8: The Final Decision. The next few days were filled with silence. Tom and Grace lived in the same house, but it felt as if they were living separate lives. Tom spent most of his time in the living room, trying to sort through his emotions, while Grace kept to herself, only speaking when necessary. There were no more arguments, no more tears, just the deafening quiet of two people trapped in their own thoughts. Tom knew that he had to make a decision. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions, and while Grace had promised to change, he still couldn't shake the feeling that the trust between them had been permanently shattered. He had asked for space, but now he needed to ask himself, could he ever move past the betrayal? Could he truly forgive her? He thought back to the days before everything had changed. They had been so happy, so in love. He remembered the way Grace used to look at him, the way they would laugh together at dinner, the way they would hold hands on the couch after the kids had gone to bed. Was that love still there? Or had it all been a lie? Step 1: The Revelation. One evening after dinner, Grace sat down next to Tom on the couch. She hadn't said much all day, and Tom could tell that she was nervous. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he had made up his mind that tonight would be the night he finally got the answers he needed. "Tom," Grace began, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. I know I've hurt you. I know I've broken your trust, and I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I want to be honest with you now. I want to tell you everything." Tom looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure if he was ready to hear everything, but he knew he needed to. He needed to know the full truth, no matter how painful it was. "I've been seeing Mark," Grace continued, her eyes brimming with tears. "And I know I shouldn't have. I've been hiding it from you because I was too ashamed. But the affair, it wasn't just about him. It was about me and the way I've been feeling for years. I felt disconnected from you, Tom. I felt alone." Tom's stomach twisted. He had already suspected as much, but hearing it out loud was like a punch to the gut. His mind raced with the implications of her words. Alone? They had been living in the same house for years, sharing everything, but now it felt like Grace had been living in a completely different world. "I don't want to make excuses for what I did," Grace said, wiping her eyes. "I made a huge mistake. But I've been trying to figure out who I am, what I want. And I've been scared, Tom. Scared of losing myself. Scared of not being enough." Tom sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything she was saying. He had never known Grace to feel this way. She had always been the strong one, the one who took care of everything, the one who held it all together. The realization that she had been silently suffering for so long made his heart ache. "Why didn't you talk to me about this, Grace?" Tom finally asked, his voice low. "Why didn't you tell me you were feeling this way?" "I was afraid," Grace admitted, her voice breaking. "I thought if I told you, you would leave me. I thought I was too much of a burden for you. I didn't want to lose you. But in trying to protect our family, I ended up destroying it." Tom shook his head slowly. "You should have trusted me, Grace. We could have worked through it together. I'm your husband. I'm supposed to be there for you." Grace nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know. And I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to fix it. So I made things worse." Step 2. The hard truth. As Tom sat there, listening to Grace pour her heart out, something began to shift inside him. He felt the anger, the hurt, the betrayal. It was all still there, but he also felt something else. Something deeper. Was it forgiveness? Was it love? Or was it just a glimmer of hope that things could eventually get better? "Grace," Tom said quietly, his voice firm but calm, "this isn't just about the affair anymore. This is about trust. It's about respect. You broke my heart. You broke our family. I can't just pretend everything is fine. But at the same time, I don't want to lose you. I don't know what to do." Grace's sobs grew louder as she reached for his hand. "I'll do anything, Tom. I'll do anything to make this right. Just give me a chance. Please." Tom pulled his hand away gently, not because he didn't want to comfort her, but because he needed space. "I can't just give you a chance, Grace. You have to prove to me that you want this. You have to show me that I can trust you again." The silence between them grew, heavy with the weight of Tom's words. He knew this was the moment of truth. If they were going to move forward, they both needed to do the work. He needed to decide whether or not he could forgive Grace, and Grace needed to show him that she was committed to changing, really changing. Step 3, the next step. Over the next few days, Tom and Grace both retreated into their thoughts. They spent less time in the same room, giving each other the space to reflect. Grace kept apologizing, but Tom wasn't sure if her words would ever be enough. After much contemplation, Tom came to a decision. He wasn't ready to let go of their marriage, but he wasn't ready to trust Grace again just yet. They needed time, and they needed to commit to working through their issues one step at a time. But this time, Tom would make sure that they both stayed accountable. He sat down with Grace and told her what he needed. "I'm willing to try, Grace, but this is going to take time. We need to go to therapy together. We need to communicate more, be open with each other, and we need to rebuild the trust that's been broken." Grace nodded, wiping her tears. "I understand, Tom. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I'll fight for us." Tom wasn't sure if they could ever go back to the way things were, but he was willing to try. This wasn't going to be an easy road, but for the first time in months, he felt a small spark of hope. Part 9, the final decision. Days turned into weeks, and the emotional tension in the Thompson household continued to simmer. Though Tom and Grace were both trying their best, the journey toward healing felt like it would never end. Every conversation seemed to circle back to the same point: trust. And in their case, that trust had been broken in ways that felt impossible to repair. Tom had spent so much of the past months trapped in a whirlwind of anger, doubt, and hurt. Grace had made a lot of efforts to show him that she was committed to making things right. But Tom couldn't help but wonder, was it enough? Could they really heal from the betrayal that had shattered their lives? Each day, Grace continued to attend therapy with Tom, as they worked on communication, rebuilding their relationship, and facing the ghosts of the past. Despite all the hard work they had put in, the cracks in their marriage remained visible. It wasn't just the affair that haunted Tom. It was everything that had led up to it: the lies, the emotional distance, and the years of him being blind to the struggles Grace had been facing. But there was something that kept Tom going, a small, flickering hope. It wasn't the hope that everything would go back to the way it was before the betrayal. No, that was gone. But there was a chance, just a small one, that they could rebuild something new, something stronger. Tom knew that it wouldn't happen overnight, and it wouldn't happen without a lot of effort from both of them. But as long as Grace was willing to fight for their marriage, as long as she was committed to changing, Tom was willing to try. Step 1. Tom's Dilemma. One Friday evening, after dinner, Tom found himself sitting alone in the living room. Grace had gone to bed early, exhausted from a long day at work, and the kids had already settled into their rooms. Tom wasn't sure what had made him feel this way, but he suddenly felt overwhelmed by a wave of doubt. He had promised himself that he would fight for this marriage. He had made the decision to stay, to give Grace another chance. But as he sat there, thinking about the future, he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe he was holding on to something that was already broken beyond repair. His thoughts drifted back to the affair, to the messages, the lies, the coldness that had seeped into their lives. He thought about the long nights he had spent questioning everything, wondering if he was just being naive for believing Grace's promises. Had she really changed? Or was he simply fooling himself, hoping for a fairy tale ending that would never come? Tom wasn't sure anymore. The anger, the resentment, the uncertainty, they were all still there, lingering like a shadow that wouldn't leave. Step 2. Grace's efforts. Meanwhile, Grace had been doing everything she could to show Tom that she was committed to their marriage. She had stopped hiding things, stopped making excuses. She had been open about her struggles, about the reasons she had cheated, and about the deep-seated feelings of neglect she had experienced over the years. She was attending therapy on her own, working through her emotional baggage, and trying her best to show Tom that she could be the partner he needed. Grace had apologized 1,000 times, and she had promised that she would do whatever it took to make things right. She knew that she could never undo the past, but she was determined to rebuild the future. But no matter how hard Grace tried, Tom still had doubts. He still couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking on eggshells, that they were both just going through the motions waiting for something to happen. And worse, he wondered if Grace was truly committed to making the changes she said she was, or if she was just telling him what he wanted to hear. Step 3. A turning point. One afternoon, Grace came home from therapy with a new sense of determination. She knew that Tom was still struggling, but she refused to give up on their marriage. She was tired of living in the shadow of her mistakes, and she was ready to take responsibility for her actions. Tom, I've been thinking, she began, sitting down beside him on the couch. I know I've hurt you more than anyone could ever imagine. And I can't change what I did. But I'm asking you to give me one more chance. I'm ready to do the hard work. I'm ready to fight for us. Tom looked at her, his heart heavy. He could see the sincerity in her eyes, but there was still a part of him that was uncertain. Could he really forgive her? Could he ever trust her again? Grace, Tom said quietly, I don't know if I can. I've been trying, but every day is a struggle. I want to believe in us, but I don't know if I can get past everything that's happened. I need time, more time to think about what I really want. Grace nodded, understanding the pain that he was going through. She knew this wasn't going to be easy. She had lost his trust, and rebuilding it would take longer than she had hoped. But she was willing to fight for as long as it took. Step 4. The final choice. A few weeks later, Tom and Grace found themselves back in therapy, sitting in front of their counselor, discussing the future of their relationship. They had made progress, small steps, but steps nonetheless. But now, Tom knew that it was time to make a decision. He had been living with this uncertainty for months, trying to move forward, trying to heal. But now he had to decide if he was willing to truly forgive Grace and start fresh. Could they rebuild their marriage, or was it time to let go? Tom knew that whatever choice he made, it would be life-changing. He didn't want to make the wrong decision. He didn't want to be trapped in a relationship that wasn't healthy for either of them. But at the same time, he still loved Grace. He still wanted to make it work. As he sat there in the therapist's office looking at Grace, he realized that the choice wasn't as simple as it seemed. He wasn't just choosing whether or not to forgive her, he was choosing whether or not he was ready to let go of the past and take a leap of faith into the unknown. Part 10, The Final Decision. Tom sat in the therapy office, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He had spent months fighting to hold his marriage together, but now he was at a crossroads. The road ahead was uncertain, and no matter which direction he chose, there would be no turning back. Across from him, Grace sat quietly, her eyes filled with expectation. She had been open, honest, and patient, everything Tom had asked for. She had given him the space he needed, and now it was up to him to decide whether or not they could rebuild. "I've been thinking a lot about this, Grace," Tom said, his voice trembling. "I've been trying to figure out if I can really forgive you. I've been holding on to all this pain, and I know it's not fair to either of us. I've been waiting for something, some sign, some feeling that would tell me it's okay to let go of the past. But it's hard, Grace. It's so hard." Grace took a deep breath, her fingers clenched in her lap. She had spent so much time trying to prove herself, trying to show Tom that she could be the woman he needed, but she knew she couldn't force him to forgive her. This was Tom's journey, and she was just waiting for him to decide if he could take that final step. "I understand, Tom," she whispered, her voice raw with emotion. "I know I can't change what I did, but I love you. I'm sorry for everything, and I'll keep fighting for us if you'll let me. But I'm not going to beg you. I just want to be honest with you. This isn't easy, and I'm not perfect, but I want to make this work." The room was filled with silence, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. Tom looked at Grace, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes, and the weight of his decision became even clearer. Could he move past the betrayal? Could he let go of the anger, the hurt, and the doubt that had built up over the months? Step 1, the reconciliation. Later that evening, Tom and Grace found themselves sitting at the kitchen table, the kids tucked away in their rooms. The house felt quieter now, calmer. Almost. Grace had been talking to Tom about the possibility of moving forward, and he had been listening, really listening, for the first time in a long while. "I've been thinking," Tom said, his voice steady but soft. "I can't change the way I feel about the past, but I can change the way I move forward. And I think I'm ready to try." Grace's eyes filled with hope as she looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. "Tom, are you sure?" He nodded, his face a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "I can't guarantee that everything will be perfect, but I want to try. I want to rebuild with you. I don't want to throw everything away. But it's going to take time. And I need you to understand that I'm still hurting. I'm still not sure how to trust you completely." Grace nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes, Tom. I just need you to give me the chance. I want us to rebuild. I want our family back." Step 2, the commitment. In the weeks that followed, Tom and Grace continued their therapy sessions, working through the emotional mess that had piled up over the past few months. It wasn't easy. There were days when Tom doubted himself and Grace's commitment. There were nights when he lay awake, wondering if he had made the right choice. But slowly, things began to improve. Grace took every opportunity to show Tom that she was there for him, that she was committed to making things right. She made efforts to rebuild their emotional connection, to communicate openly, and to address the underlying issues that had led to the affair. For Tom, it wasn't just about forgiving Grace. It was about learning to trust her again. And that would take time. It would take patience and commitment from both of them. One night, about a month after their decision to move forward, Tom and Grace sat down to have a quiet conversation about the future. "Tom, I know things aren't perfect," Grace said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "But I'm trying. I'm really trying. And I just need you to know that I'm here. I'm here for you, for us. I want us to make it through this." Tom looked at her, his heart swelling with both love and uncertainty. "I want that too, Grace. But I need to know that we're both on the same page. I can't do this if I'm still holding on to the past. I need to know that you're committed to making things work. No more secrets." Grace nodded earnestly, No more secrets. I'm here, Tom. I'm committed. Step 3. Healing together. As time passed, Tom and Grace began to experience small victories. They went on dates, reconnected with each other, and began to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. It wasn't always smooth sailing. There were bumps along the way, days when the doubt crept back in. But they learned to communicate, to be open about their feelings, and to support each other through the difficult moments. They also focused on their family, spending more time together as a unit. Tom and Grace made sure to be present for their children, showing them that despite the struggles they had faced, their family was strong. They wanted their children to see the value of love, forgiveness, and commitment. Step 4. The new beginning. One day, about 6 months after their confrontation, Tom and Grace went for a walk in the park together. It was a peaceful Saturday morning, the kind of day they used to enjoy before everything fell apart. Tom looked at Grace, and for the first time in a long while he felt hopeful. He could see the changes in her. She was committed, she was trying, and most importantly, she was being honest. "I don't know what the future holds, Grace," Tom said softly, his hand brushing against hers. "But I'm ready to face it with you. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Grace smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I'm so glad you're willing to give us a chance, Tom. I promise I won't let you down again." They walked hand in hand, knowing that their journey was far from over. The road to healing was long, but it was a road they were both willing to travel side by side. The end. Thank you for watching the final part of Tom and Grace's journey. We appreciate you sticking with us through this emotional roller coaster. If you've enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and subscribe for more. We hope this story has inspired you to keep fighting for love, forgiveness, and second chances. Until next time,